Welcome back to How to Craft Fair. Getting accepted as a vendor into high profile, juried craft markets can be a competitive experience. However, there are several strategies that you can employ in order to improve your odds of getting accepted into the event. This video contains all of my favorite tips that'll help you get into the best craft fairs in your area. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so my first tip is to know the fair's focus. Research the craft fair's theme and demographics. Make sure that your work aligns with what the fair represents. Tailoring your application to fit the fair's criteria can make a strong impression. Oftentimes, juried craft markets have some kind of a theme to them. So maybe it's like an upcycling, maybe it's vintage. There's a lot of times that there's some kind of a theme that's attached to the show. So is there a way that you can showcase your brand in a manner that meshes with the vibe of the theme? So think about things that you can do to kind of weave in and out of your business. Even think about the language that you use on the vendor application. Think of keywords or phrases that might come up and kind of, again, align with what the show is representing. So, for example, again, if it's something upcycling or vintage, you can almost even phrase the way that you're speaking and, the way that you're typing things out or writing them out to align with the show. So my first tip basically is just to kind of get yourself centered with the event that you're trying to get into. Tip number 2, submit high quality photos. You want to submit clear, well lit, large photos. And by large, I mean the file size. Okay, so the picture should not be like this tiny picture so that when it gets blown up, it gets all grainy, it gets all stretched out, and you can't see what's going on. So you want to be careful about not only how the photo is taken, but then you want to be careful about the file sizes so that when they're opened by the organizers, by the jury of the event, it opens up into a clear image that's not pixelated, not stretched out. Okay, so good photography. It's incredibly important. It can greatly enhance your odds of acceptance into an event. So this is one of the most important things that you need to take seriously in order to start getting accepted into juried events and just the more high profile events that are in your area. Now, one thing I want to make a note of is that you definitely don't necessarily need pro equipment. You don't need a big old camera, a great lens, or anything like that. Honestly, just our smartphones are generally good enough. You just, again, want to focus on the lighting. You want to focus on the clarity. Take multiple pictures of your items, of your booth, your entire setup. Make sure that you're deleting anything that's blurry, a little bit grainy. Maybe you were just moving and something wasn't quite in focus. You just want to take the best of the best and keep only your good shots. So again, this is going to greatly increase your odds of getting into a show. And another tip that I can make on photography while we're talking about it is if you have smaller products. I have mentioned light boxes on the channel before. And if you're not familiar with a light box, basically it's just like a cube with an LED ring of lights on the inside of it, and it disperses the light really nicely, really evenly. And if you do small product photography, this can be a great addition to your setup and presentation to a jury. And the nice thing is that it comes on a great budget. Okay, so light boxes, depending on the size you need, they range from about roughly $30 to $75, somewhere in there. And then, of course, you already have your smartphone, right? So that's pretty much all that you need to kind of get started with a light box setup. A lot of them come with different backgrounds that you can use. So if you don't want just like a plain white or a plain black background, a lot of the light boxes will come with kind of like a starter kit with different backgrounds that you can slide into the box. And then that way it'll offer a little bit of flavor, if you just don't want something black or white. But photography, very, very important when you start talking about leveling up and getting into these more high profile events. You have to have great product photography of your individual products, but then especially you have to have a great photo, multiple photos I would recommend of your booth setup, and tailor your booth setup to the show itself. So again, we touched on the theme of the show. How can you tailor your setup in a way that best aligns with the show. Okay, so if it's an event that's maybe in the country, like it's out, in the farmland somewhere, well then maybe you kind of go a little bit more rustic with your booth setup. If it's an event that's taking place in the city, maybe that's when you go a little bit more chic, a little bit more modern. You kind of go a little bit bolder, in the city. So think about just even those kind of event demographics and how you can shape your booth to align with that. Tip number 3, create a compelling artist statement. So at some point during the application process, you're going to have to write a statement that shares your inspiration and the story behind your work. So I want you to think about how this statement might align with the event visitor demographics and the organizers themselves. So again, we're kind of thinking about this event in particular. Try to get a little bit outside of yourself and your story. Now, I don't want you to completely sell out and just make it strictly about the event, okay? But you do have to find some kind of a balancing act between telling your true story, but also connecting with the event so that you can get the organizers and jurors excited to make you be a part of it. Okay, so like I said, there's a little bit of a balancing act there, but you can definitely do it. Practice this at home. I would actually encourage all vendors, whether or not you're going to even participate in events that are juried events, do this for all events. Okay, so think about your setup, think about your booth and your products, the story behind everything, how you got started, what inspired you to first become a vendor, to maybe make your best-selling product. What was the story behind that? And then think about how that can sort of connect with different events that you either already participate in or you'd like to participate in. So this is like a fun exercise that you can do as a vendor in order to start phrasing your business and selling your business in written form to align with different events and different styles. All right, so my 4th tip is to showcase a cohesive body of work. You want to ensure that your work demonstrates a consistent style or theme. So when I mention your work, one of the things that we're probably thinking about here is the actual inventory, like the creations themselves being presented. Does that have a theme? Does your creations mesh well together? Jurors, they're not really looking for booths that have 10 different styles and it feels like they're going in 10 different directions and things like that. They want vendors who know who they are, know who they create, and know the audience that they're trying to attract. But this goes so much deeper than just the products being offered. This definitely is bleeding into the booths themselves. Okay, so they're going to look at your items for sure, but they're also going to look at your booth as a whole. Okay, so does one section of your booth feel vintage and rustic or country? And then does another section of your booth feel kind of urban or sleek or modern? You don't really want that. You want to have one vibe throughout your entire booth, okay? And not to say that, you can only sell one product or you can only sell 1 or 2 products. I'm not really saying that. You can sell as many things as you want at your booth as long as it feels like it's one booth, okay? So just think about how you can unify things with colors, with fabrics, with your signage, your marketing materials, accents or displays. You just have to make sure that everything is all tied together so that it feels like one storefront. Okay, so that's pretty much the goal of showcasing a cohesive body of work, is that you want it to show as it coming from one vendor. Okay, so basically you don't want it to appear like 10 people thought of 10 different ideas and then that's your booth. Okay, so you want it to just show as it's coming from you. This is your identity, this is your personality at your booth. Tip number 5, and this one, it's probably kind of boring, but it's to follow guidelines. Now, it's incredibly important when you're a vendor to adhere to all application guidelines meticulously. I honestly don't even care whether it's a juried event or it's not juried, okay? So you should take every event seriously when it comes to this matter. So you want to pay attention to deadlines, any required materials that you might need to submit, like for example, any kind of permits or licensing or like tax forms, things like that that you might need to submit ahead of time. And even your booth specifications if you have to submit those. Sometimes the organizers kind of want to know that in advance, like what's going to be set up, what's going to be sold at the booth. But basically, a well-organized application reflects professionalism, and that is going to score you really big points with event organizers of high-profile events. Okay, so just be sure that you take the time to read all the rules and know what they are ahead of time so that you aren't asking questions that have already been addressed by the organizer. So that's kind of like another big tip that I've kind of mentioned a few times on the channel before, but you want to read everything, okay? Because you don't want to put yourself in the position where the organizer has to repeat themselves because you're covering stuff that's already been maybe included in like a vendor packet or an application and you haven't read it. So now they have to do extra work just because of you not doing your due diligence. Okay. So put that effort in up front and that will pay off down the road. Tip number 6, this is kind of a fun one that we haven't really talked about on the channel very much, but you want to highlight unique aspects of your business. And what I mean by that is, for example, if your work has unique aspects like sustainability, cultural significance, or innovative techniques, you want to be sure that you highlight these and point these out in your event application, because jurors may be seeking originality or vendors who are supporting good causes. A lot of times when we were organizing events, these are the types of vendors that we wanted in our shows because they just pretty much brought the entire event up to a higher standard. You know, it just really made things more impactful for the community. So it also shows the organizers that you have an ability to work well with others. So, for example, if you're partnering with some sort of charity or you have some sort of external partnerships associated with your business that are beneficial in some way, this really reflects well with juried events because, again, it's just proving that you work well with others. Tip number 7 is to gather testimonials. If possible, include testimonials or references from previous shows or customers, or better yet, organizers of events. That's kind of like the cream of the crop right there. But positive feedback, it can bolster your credibility. So that's kind of what this tip is about, is bolstering that credibility. Be sure to have some kind of a page on your website dedicated to testimonials and definitely keep that up to date. So be sure that you kind of timestamp these or, date stamp them with when that feedback was given to you. Okay. So the more recent, of course, obviously the better, but this will not only increase your chances to getting into these juried events, but it's also going to reflect well on potential customers that may be visiting your website. So it's kind of nice. It's almost like a 2 birds with 1 stone type of deal where, maybe it'll boost your sales for a little bit while also increasing those odds and getting into craft fairs. So this is definitely something that all vendors should be doing. Again, whether or not you plan on applying into juried events, it's always good to have those testimonials up to date. Tip number 8 is to engage with the community. You want to attend other craft fairs as a visitor and network with other artists, build relationships within the craft community. This can provide both some valuable insights and maybe even some potential future opportunities for yourself. I would also recommend, for sure, getting to know the event that you're applying to be a part of. Okay, so it's a little bit, I'm not going to say even a little bit, it's a lot harder to get into an event if you're completely blind to it, if you're not familiar with it at all. So what I would recommend is that you scope it out, visit the show, and get to know it, find out the ins and outs of it so that you have some kind of groundwork laid down as a foundation of information for yourself. So get to know the vendors. And if you have a vendor friend who's at a show that, perhaps they're already participating in it, if you're able to network with some vendors and get a potential referral from an existing vendor of a show, that can go a really long way with the event organizers and the jury of the show. Okay. So there's so many different benefits of networking, and a lot of them, we don't really see them until kind of further down the road. All right. So you just want to always work on those networking relationships that you might have, and you never know what it could lead to in the future. All right, now we're going to talk about gaining experience. So this tip, it's a little bit straightforward and kind of obvious, and it might even be a little bit discouraging for newer vendors, but it might be tempting to want to jump right into your favorite event. But if you haven't been a vendor at many shows, or if you're kind of kicking the rust off, or just trying to get better as a veteran vendor, it might be best to practice a little bit of patience and get a handful of shows under your belt before trying to get into the very best events in your area. Get a feel for the lead up to the craft fair, how it feels to participate in a market, and everything that you need to do to properly wrap up a show. That's pretty much like the craft fair cycle. Everything that you have to do before, and then what you have to do during a show, and then all the tasks that you're going to be faced with as you come out of an event and kind of experience that post-event wrap up. But there's so much that goes into the process of being a craft fair vendor, and you'll want to have that whole cycle down before you jump straight into the big time. Okay. So again, try to resist that temptation if you're newer, or if you're just kind of, again, kicking the rust off, to jump right into the best market in your area. Now, not to say that, you won't get lucky. Maybe you get accepted, but do you really want to put all that pressure on yourself if, you kind of haven't done something relatively close to that scale before? So that's a whole different conversation. And I have a video on how it feels to deal with craft fair anxiety and sometimes the pressure that we put on ourselves. I'll post a link to that video up here if you want to watch that. But again, that's a whole different conversation and so many tips that come with that. But for this video, I hope that these tips here will help to get you thinking about your business and the preparedness that it's going to require in order for you to be accepted into the very best events in your area. Just keep working on yourself. And I tell vendors all the time that if you can basically get like 1 or 2% better each time out, that's going to snowball and it's going to add up to a whole heck of a lot by the time you get through, like, say, one full craft fair season. Okay. So try not to be tempted into thinking that you have to make such a massive leap from show to show. Just kind of notice little things here and there, jot some notes down for yourself when you're at craft fairs. And then before you know it, it's going to just add up into something amazing. So this video, I hope you enjoyed it today. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. That helps tremendously. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great day.